Welcome back everyone, welcome kitchen table wizards, welcome Magic fans from all over the world, welcome to another casual MTG Deck Tech. If you already watched some of my videos, you might know that I like to interact with you guys and I sometimes ask you to leave a comment below. Well, this video is based on a little comment below. It's a little comment below of a friend I got to know through Magic from Brazil. She asked me, "Hey Bram, can you make a casual discard deck?" Now the cool thing about Magic is that it's become so big. There are millions of people playing the game all over the world. And that's also what I like about it. You can go to Australia, you can go to Japan, you can go to the US, you can go to Brazil. And you will always find a place to play Magic. And when I was in Brazil a few years ago for work, during the time that Shadows over Innistrad released, I tried to find a local game store in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, to go to the pre-release. Now, sad thing happened, all the cards during that time of Shadows over Innistrad were held in customs, so the whole pre-release in the whole of Brazil was cancelled. So I end up at the store, there was no one there, except for Bella, who was working at the store, and she explained to me the situation. So I bought a few boosters and we just played some drafts together and I made a new friend from Brazil. We stayed in touch and a little bit later I found out that Bella also was pretty creative. And I told her about my two cats, Storm and Cookie, and that we also have a nice cat deck. Spoiler for the next video maybe, who knows. I talked with Bella and she proposed to draw some nice tokens of our two cats. Aren't they beautiful? Look here. And Cookie, just great. So to thank her, I sent a few slivers to Brazil. Luckily they weren't held in customs for Bella's sliver deck. Maybe sliver deck for the next video, who knows, suspense. So for this video you have to also thank Bella because she subscribed and left a comment, and you can do the same thing. You can tell me about your favorite discard card that you like to play, or if you have a suggestion for a new deck, just write it in the comment below and tell me what you want to see. Also, our good friends at Card Market are giving away some vouchers to me and I want to spread them with you guys. So I'm going to give away one of those €10 vouchers also to one of you guys, one of the subscribers. You don't have to do much, just subscribe to my channel and leave a comment. In my quest of building this deck, I already immediately had a tough choice to make. Do I need to focus on the discarding of the card itself? Or do I need to focus on the fact that if my opponent doesn't have a lot of cards in his or her hand, we can punish him for that? I went with the second route and I focused on that. And I did it also based on a small idea I had from back in the day, from an old school deck with the coolest discard card out there, the Hypnotic Spectre. Back in the day, when you play a swamp on your first turn, you tap it and play a Dark Ritual. This gives you 3 mana, and then you play an Hypnotic Spectre, you won't make your opponent happy. Especially not if he's playing a control deck. So this deck is going to be a little bit of a tribute to Bella, but also a big tribute to the Hypnotic Spectre. Enough with all the intros, let's head into the deck. Let's start with the land base first. The deck is mono black and needs an untapped land on turn 1. It really gives me the chills and it fits the theme perfectly, don't you think? Leave a comment below if you like the swamp. Then a few one-offs for utility. Bojuka Bog removes the graveyard of your opponent, so all the discarded cards will never return. Quicksand and Blighted Fen are good defensive land cards that can deal with creatures of your opponent if they get onto the battlefield. Barren Moor gives you a card when you don't need a land, and Gaia Reach Sanitarium gets you to cycle through your deck, and because your opponent doesn't have cards in his hand, or at least that's what we're going to try to do, it doesn't matter if he or she also cycles through his deck. On top of this, I also play a one-off just for flavor purposes. I also play one Dark Ritual. Look at that iconic old art from about 20, almost 30 years ago. Really cool card. It reminds me back in the day when I was playing Magic when I was still in high school. And also look at what the card says. It says Interrupt. And it used to be called an interrupt because it would resolve before the other spells. But luckily they have simplified Magic now, and now the Dark Ritual has become an instant. Also, the new art is pretty neat. So playing a discard deck, it's really important to disrupt your hand of your opponent from the beginning. Otherwise, he will establish a board and then it's going to be very hard to come back into the game. That's why we decided to play a lot of discard spells with low mana cost. I will play 9 discard spells and 6 of them only cost 1 to play. I play 2 Divest, 1 Harsh Scrutiny, 1 Despise and 2 Duress. All the cards do pretty much the same. They make your opponent reveal his hand and you can choose a card. Sometimes you can choose a creature, sometimes you can choose a non-creature. Depends a little bit on which discard card you play. But the good thing is you get all the information of your opponent's hand and you can remove a dangerous threat from his hand as well. Then I also play 1 discard spell that costs 2. Lay Bare the Heart has your opponent also reveal his or her hand, but you can choose a non-legendary non-land card from it. So the selection is even wider. That's why it costs 2 mana. But it's a good card. Most of you never seen these 4 cards. Actually, they're all the same. They're called Hymn to Turach and they got reprinted in Eternal Masters. Back in the day when they were first printed in Fallen Empires, the card had 4 different arts for 1 card, which is pretty weird, but they're all pretty nostalgic art and I especially like the first one with the wolf. Also, the card is crazy powerful. For only 2 mana you can have your opponent discard 2 cards at random, so he can't even choose himself which card he's going to discard, which is very good. And look at the new art, it's also pretty cool. I play 2 Hymn to Turachs in my deck. Then of course we need some specters. And I am not referring to the terrorist organization in the James Bond movie with the crazy dude with his cat that tries to rule the world.
You made a mistake, my friend. Remove his helmet. James Bond, allow me to introduce myself.
Because there's absolutely no resemblance with this video and that at all. No, specters in Magic the Gathering are evil spirits that come to haunt your opponents. And most of all, they're going to take cards out of your opponent's hand. I play 7 different specters for a total of 13 creatures in my deck. For 3 mana, this is probably the best Spectre ever printed. And also it's the inspiration for the deck. So I decided to play the full playset. An important thing is that the discard is at random. So sometimes, with a little bit of luck, you can get your opponent's best card out of his or her hand. And he or she won't be happy. The Abyssal Spectre is a slower and, to be honest, less exciting Spectre. It costs 1 additional mana than the Hypnotic Spectre, and for that you don't get that much. Just an extra point of toughness, and it doesn't even forces your opponent to discard at random, but hey, it's a Spectre and for flavor purposes I decided to play one. Feld Spectre from Core 19 and although it's a bit slower, does one thing I really like. It forces a discard the turn it comes into play. And on top, it also does damage each time your opponent discards a card, which can be a nice combo with all the other Spectres or also with Gyara's Sanitarium. Just tap the land and deal 2 damage to your opponent without even attacking if you have a Feld Spectre on the board. Like the Feld Spectre, I also decided to play 2 Liliana Spectre. For 3 mana, I like the fact that you also force your opponent to discard immediately. And the power of 2 and flying is also okay. The Headless Spectre is also a worse version of the Hypnotic Spectre. And its ability also is activated when you have no cards in hand. But it fits the team quite well, so I also included 1 copy. Also mainly for flavor purposes, but a 2/2 flyer that has the ability to have your opponent discard now and then is not that bad. The next one is called Gul'Dra Spectre. It also hits for 2, but it could also hit for 5 when your opponent doesn't have any cards in hand. Cool ability, because this will happen quite often in the deck. And the last one of our Angry Ghost is the Shimmyan Spectre. When this one hits, it will hurt, as you will be able to choose 1 card in the player's hand, library and graveyard and exile this card. This is a nightmare for the combo player. And I like to deliver the occasional nightmare. So, we talked about removing our opponent's hand with Spectres and with discard spells. But then what? Your opponent is not dead when we do that. So we need ways to kill him. Now most of our Spectres are pretty slow. They have a small power, except for this guy when he hits hard. But we also need some help in this department. Let's look at the following cards that can help us. For this I included our most badass looking Planeswalker Davriel Rogue Shadow Mage. Davriel's -1 ability makes your opponent discard a card, and its static ability says at the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, if your opponent has 1 or fewer cards in hand, Davriel deals 2 damage to him. So that's already a nice start to deal some extra damage, but we have more. In the original old school deck we also played the Rack. A painful device if your opponent doesn't have cards in hand during their upkeep. And this is exactly what we're going for. The Rack deals 3 damage if your opponent has no cards in hand, 2 damage for 1 card and 1 damage if he or she has 2 cards in hand. This can definitely put on the pressure from the start if you have the right discard spells to have your opponent discard his or her hand. And last, but definitely not least, I play Shrieking Affliction. And I play 3 copies of this badass enchantment that will have your opponent lose 3 life if he or she has 1 or fewer cards in hand. The card also only costs 1 mana to play, so you can play it early to have a maximum effect. Now often your opponent will start first, and maybe if he plays an aggressive deck, will already be dropping 1 or 2 creatures on the board, so that's why you also need some removal spells. Smallpox actually does everything we want in this deck, and although it will also hurt us, it will hurt your opponent more, especially with a Shrieking Affliction, a Davriel or a Rack out there. Diabolic Edict also makes your opponent sacrifice a creature, but it even does it at instant speed. This is especially good versus creatures with hexproof who can't be targeted. And then I also play some cheap effective removal. Defile is a great new card and I play 2 of them. And because I play 17 swamps, it will give a lot of minuses to your opponent's creature. And Bile Blight is also great, especially versus decks that play a lot of the same creatures like token decks. Alright, we're almost done, but I also included 4 more cards that could help us draw cards or give a little bit of a boost to our deck. First, I play 2 times Sign in Blood, a really cheap way to draw cards, and we're also going to lose a little bit of life, but if you play black, you're going to lose life when you draw cards. Then I'm also going to play 1 Icon of Ancestry, a new card from core 20, and of course we're going to choose Spectre as our creature type. This card can help us speed up the clock and make our spectres stronger. And it could also help us search for spectres for only 3 mana. The last one is a special card from Dominaria. It's called Phyrexian Scriptures. I'm going to show it to you because it's a bit more simple. This enchantment doesn't do a lot on the first turn it comes into play. It will just boost one of your spectres, but the next turn it will destroy all creatures except for artifact creatures. Pretty strong card that is great when you're behind and if your opponent has already a few creatures on board. So this was the deck, now on to the power rankings. For power I gave this deck a 7, for complexity I also gave it a 7, and they go hand in hand a little bit. If you know which card to choose to discard from your opponent's hand, it will make the deck a lot more powerful. But it also adds some complexity because you have to know your opponent's strategy, so that's why it can be a little bit difficult to play this discard deck. Consistency I gave it a 6. It really depends a little bit on if you're on the play or on the draw. That's why I think a 6 is an okay number. I gave it a 7 for offense, and offense is not hitting hard immediately with creatures but disrupting your opponent's game plan from turn 1. Defense wise, it's a little bit worse. It has some removal but not that much, so defense I give it a 6. Of course, there's a big fun factor if you like discard decks, and it's also cool to try to find out your opponent's strategy and to have him discard the cards he really wants to play. So fun factor, I think a 7 is a good number. Then on to the metagame review. If your opponent is playing an aggro deck and is going to be very fast on the board, you might have some problem. Because your creatures are not that strong, they are mainly focused to discard cards from your opponent's hand. So they're not that good in defense. And also you have a little bit of removal but not too much, so against aggressive decks it can get difficult. If you have a little bit more time against, for example, a mid-range deck, your deck will do a lot better. And also versus a control deck I prefer the matchup than versus an aggressive deck, because a control player also takes some time to set up his plan, and during that time you can disrupt the plan, you can have your opponent discard his card draw spells and you can take over the game. Oh yeah, if you're going to play against a combo deck, you're in for some fun. Especially if you have a Shimian Spectre out there, you can just with one attack completely destroy the game plan of the combo player. He's not going to like that, that's for sure. So to finish off this casual deck tech about a discard strategy, I will include some other possible strategies or deck ideas in the maybe board. So instead of playing a completely black deck, you can also play black with red. You can play Angrat the Flame Chained, which also has a discard ability. You can play a very powerful discard spell called Blightning. And I also like Angrat's Rampage in this deck. Black-Red has also a pretty cool discard land called Rixmadi Dungeon Place. And of course you need some more Spectres. If you add red, you can play the Blazing Spectre as well. It's a creature that has haste and it's like the Abyssal Spectre, but I like it a lot more because of the haste. You can also combine black with blue to play a discard deck. The following two creatures aren't specters, but they fit right into the deck. Psychic Symbiont is a flying horror that lets your opponent discard a card, and you can even draw a card when it enters the battlefield. And the Dimir Cutpurse is also a very good Hypnotic Spectre kind of card, but it also has you draw cards. So both of them powerful. I especially like the Cutpurse. The Symbiont is a bit more expensive and fits more into a control shell than to a traditional, more aggressive discard deck. Black and blue also have some nice Spectres to play. You can play a Blizzard Spectre, and you can even include a Snow team. You can play a very powerful Night Veil Spectre. I hesitated a little bit to put it in the deck, but a triple black, I think it was a bit tricky, so I left it out. But you could even play it in a mono black deck. And then there's also Doomsday Spectre. This is also a very powerful Spectre. You can play a nice strategy for a more control shell with this one. Black and blue can be a cool strategy as well. So if you want to play black and blue, you are also going to want to include the following cards. Thought Erasure is a very good simple discard spell. And Disinformation Campaign works very well with the Thought Erasure, because when you surveil, you can put it back into your hand and play it again. Then there's this very powerful spell that is also played in Pauper called Recoil. It says return target permanent to its owner's hand, and then that player discards a card. So it's actually a removal spell if your opponent doesn't have cards in hand. So then you played with black and red, you played with black and blue. Why don't we play with black and blue and red? So we can include the Sidraxis Spectre, or we can include a Cruel Ultimatum. Two great cards also for a discard deck to build around. Before I finish, I want to head back to a pure black spell that's also pretty strong. And why is that? It's very flexible. It's called Funeral Charm, and it's an instant. And you can play it right after your opponent has drawn his card. So he will immediately have to discard it. Or you can also have a creature gain Swamp Walk, maybe one of your Spectres, if your opponent is also playing black, or you could even use it to remove a creature or boost one of your Spectres. So, very strong card, Funeral Charm. I might include it in my deck as well. If you want to be a bit more tricky and you like some risk, you have to play one Demonic Pact. This mythic card from Magic Origins has 4 modes, and at the beginning of your upkeep you just choose one that hasn't been chosen before. You can have the card deal 4 damage to target creature or player and you gain 4 life. You can have your opponent discard 2 cards. You can draw 2 cards, and when you've already done those 3 things, the last option is a bit more saddening. You lose the game. So try to win before you have to choose the last option, because otherwise it's game over. Another enchantment you can play is the Eldest Reborn. It's also a bit more of a controlling card. It has your opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. On the next mode, you will have your opponent discard a card. And on the third mode, you can put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard into the battlefield under your control. I think it also fits the team very well. I think it's a bit expensive in a low to the ground deck, but it's definitely a card that fits right into a discard deck. I'm almost done, but I'm still going to talk about this card. It's called Get's Grimoire. It's an old card from Darksteel, and it says whenever an opponent discards a card from his or her hand, you may draw a card. And it works very well with Gaia Reach Sanitarium. As you can imagine, pay 2 mana, draw a card, discard a card. Oh, your opponent discards a card, you draw an additional card. Very good combo. I left it out of the deck really at the last minute because I focused more on the Rack and Shrieking Affliction. but it also works very well in a discard deck. And then I also want to talk about a big missed opportunity. Wizards of the Coast, what were you thinking when you created this card? Urgoros, the empty one, could have been a great Spectre. It could have been the best Spectre out there, but what did you guys do? You made it cost 6 mana and it doesn't even do anything when it enters the battlefield. Its power is only 4, its toughness is only 3. And yes, when it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card at random. Hypnotic Spectre does that for 3 mana as well. And if the player can't, you draw a card. But who cares, you are already winning. Oh, what a fail, Urgoros, the empty one. It really leaves me with an empty feeling. It's good?